Hello, welcome back to my channel, Biblical Validity, which is talks about how science and history and logic all greatly support the validity or the reliability of the Bible. And so we contrast that with the scientific mainstream views, the kind of the how most of the world looks at all this. And and this is beginning a series I'm pretty excited to start, the 6 days of creation. I actually started before. I was just kind of winging it, the days of creation. I thought, that's not very organized. So if you're one of the one of the relatively few early subscribers to my channel and you watched my day one and day two of creation, I'm sorry. I'm going to redo it, and I hope it's worth your while to watch this new and improved version. If not, I can certainly understand that. Okay, so here we go. The what am I doing this for? And I think it's important to see how complicated, how much it took to design this universe. And these 6 days of creation, the first day, God says, "Let there be light." And it looks like that's all he did that day, as if, okay, turn on the light bulb. Wait a minute. The creator of the universe had to create the light bulb, right? Or at least create light. And what's involved in light, and wow, it is deep and involved, and there's a lot to it. And you get this with every day of creation. The miracles of every day of creation really indicate a very meticulous designer of our universe who created everything to fit together very nicely so that we could have this wonderful existence. And contrast that with the scientific mainstream, which or atheist views that well, just this universe popped up in some kind of big bang at random. Random processes evolved after billions of years into what we have today, and we just happen to live in a universe where all the scientific constants, which have to be very precisely tuned, fit together. The laws of nature have to be all work together, and here we are. And it's that world is starting to see that they can't explain the Big Bang, a single Big Bang. So now they're starting to think, well, there must have been a bunch of Big Bangs, or maybe there's infinitely big bangs going on at all times, and we just happen to live in one where life can exist. We got lucky. All right. Um, they can never prove that. So, because yeah, how do you see outside of our own universe? Okay. Oh well, but they're theories. They're interesting theories. Okay, but I would say that the majority of the world does not agree or believe or subscribe to the view of the book of Genesis, that the universe was created in 6 days, approximately 6,000 years ago. Most of the world does not believe this. All the scientific textbooks, mainstream scientific textbooks, they don't even mention it. They think it's so absurd. And I would venture to say that probably a majority of Christians don't even believe in the 6 days of creation. A Christian would believe that God created this universe, and but he may have taken the 13.8 billion years that mainstream science is telling us that it took, rather than 6 days, 6,000 years ago. Okay, all right. So that's kind of my aim for this series on the days of creation, and I'm like I said, I'm kind of excited to get into this because I'm learning a lot more about science and how it all fits together, and how God put this together is amazing and incredible. And to me, it points to we don't, we're not just looking to demonstrate, well, there has to be some kind of creator or designer of the universe. Was that creator very personally involved in this creation, which means logically he was probably very personally involved in creating our own individual lives. And so that's kind of my aim here. Okay, so this is kind of the preamble to the 6 days of creation. In the beginning, the first two verses, and I want to go through this, and even the first two verses are have some very interesting aspects to them. And let's get going. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And actually, the original King James version of the Bible from 1611 says heaven, not heavens. It doesn't matter because it means space. We need volume. We need space in order to hold matter. And in order for matter to go into motion, we also need, in the in the beginning, God created Einstein's E equals mc squared. We need a way to go from matter to energy, so that there be motion. And in order for things to go into motion, we need time. We need time. So it's all there in the first verse. Okay. Now, for deeper discussion of this first verse, I did a video called "The Most Amazing Sentence Ever Written," and this is it. The beginning of the Bible is the most amazing sentence ever written, and I have a feeling I didn't cover it all either when I did that video. But I'll give you a really short version. All right. In order to have a physical existence, there must be time, space, and matter. All right. Um, because, like I say, we need time to put things into motion, have things in motion. We need space for matter. We need matter itself. So in the beginning, time, God created the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. All right, so there it is. And this sentence was written about somewhere between, let's say, between my best estimate that I've seen is between 1446 BC and 1406 BC by Moses. And there is evidence Moses lived in Egypt. I don't think it's conclusive yet, but there's a statue or two, some mentions that there was Moses. He would have been called by an Egyptian name. And there's actually a tomb that was reserved for this character who seems to fit the description of Moses. Of course, the tomb was found to be empty. No mummies or anything like that. So anyway, was Moses a great scientist? Oh, heck no. You know, no one at that time understood science like this. And it's very basic. All right. And so we didn't have those kind of thinkers back in the 1400s BC. Was that around 3,400 years ago or so? Okay. So, but another question for this first sentence is, why God? All right. Wait a minute. What about God? We have That's the other aspect of this first sentence. There is a God, according to the claim. In order to have this physical universe, there must be a creative source outside our natural world. And I've done a video on that I'll mention here in a minute. So, very briefly, the universe has not always been here. It is not eternal, at least going backwards in time. So, going backwards in time, the universe is not eternal. And we first got a real solid glimpse of this in the mid 1800s with the second law of thermodynamics, which indicates that everything decays. And if the universe was eternal, it would have decayed infinitely many years in the past, and we wouldn't be here. Okay. Um, and so it really is impossible, if we agree with the second law of thermodynamics, which is one of the most verified scientific laws out there in terms of physics, at least. And so this was people started to realize this in the mid 1800s, and I imagine it got a interesting reaction from the people who were already thinking denying this whole thing, or atheists. And then in the 1920s, Edwin Hubble discovered there are galaxies in our universe, that the universe is expanding. And if you go backwards in time, it was actually a Belgian priest who realized if you go backwards in time, everything coalesced into a single point in space where all the matter and energy was created, and then it just blew up. Okay, expanded. That's the Big Bang, the Big Bang model, which makes sense according to their assumptions. Makes great sense. And so, but then it means that the universe has a beginning again. There is a beginning, and what caused this beginning? The universe, can matter create itself? Can energy create itself? No, time can't create itself. So there has to be a supernatural element out there which creates all this. We call him God. All right. And so the universe required a starting point. It could not create itself out of nothing. And the mainstream, some of the mainstream scientists who think about this stuff, think about cosmology, the beginnings of the universe. This is why they're starting to come up with these other theories, multiverse theories, and stuff like that, which well, they're grasping at straws, in my humble opinion. But to explain how the universe could create itself, and maybe it's always been creating itself. I don't know. they have a lot of theories, which and no way to giving evidence for them other than, oh, it makes sense to us. Okay, they rely on their own understanding. Um, okay, so but the only witness to creation would have been God. Okay, we could not witness it. So all our theories about creation are theories. Even the Bible, scientifically, is a theory about how the universe created itself. All right. Now, if you're a big believer in God, in the Bible, it's no longer a theory. It's we accept that as fact. But but from a scientific standpoint, Genesis is also a theory. All right. It's part of what I in another video I called historical science. Okay. So if you want a more detailed explanation of what I just talked about, see my video, A Scientific Basis for a Personal God, part two. And so I've started creating a series. I haven't finished it yet on the scientific basis for a personal God, but I get into all this stuff in a lot more detail in part two of that. All right. So let's look at the first two verses of the Bible, which is what this video is dedicated to. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. All right, so part of the earth is matter, was apparently water. There was water, there was earth, matter. It was formless. Maybe it wasn't a sphere. Maybe it's just stuff. Okay, it was kind of the the building blocks of of what God's going to do. So I find this second verse a little confusing. Like, what in the world does this exactly mean? And I don't know if we'll ever get to it. So all we can do is throw out some theories and just leave it at that, I think. But here's something I think is kind of interesting to think about. The first verse of the Bible, it sets up a conflict between the Judeo-Christian version of creation and the scientific materialistic version. All right, so already we have a conflict, and it divides the earth into two camps. All right, it's either God created this universe, or not, and or at least not this version of it. So already we have a division line there, and yeah, that's the way it goes. Okay, now the second verse, interesting to me. I didn't really know about this until I don't know, a couple years ago. After I got saved and started diving into all this, the second verse sets up a conflict within the Judeo-Christian interpretation of creation, and so some people believe that there were two creations: the first verse, and then the rest of the Bible. And this is known as the gap theory. And so the gap theory, I hope, correct me if I'm wrong, I think was proposed in the 1830s, maybe 1812, somewhere in the early first half of the 19th century. This gap theory, and I think people were looking for a way to reconcile what appears to be a very ancient universe, long time periods, with but still keep it. God created all this, all right. Still keep it ostensibly Christian, perhaps in nature. And anyway, there are some people that believe in the gap theory, and they have different motivations for doing this. And I really don't want to criticize any of it. Um, let me get into this a little bit. What I know, and I'm no expert on the gap theory, but here's what I think I know. Okay, to be correct. If there was a first creation, then God chose not to tell us anything about it. All right, and one theory is that when Lucifer rebelled against God and was cast down to earth along with some of the angels, this wrecked the first creation. All right, and so thus the earth was formless. There were waters and it was dark. This just sounds like a big mess. Okay, it was a big mess. Um, okay, now the believers in the gap theory can cite, and I've heard one or two people talk about it. I have great respect for them as Christians, and great respect for their attempt to explain this. Believers in the gap theory can cite some Bible verses as evidence, but there seems to be room for interpretation, I would say, as there often is in the Bible. Okay. So Lucifer's, I'll give you a little references if you want to start looking into it if you're interested. Lucifer's fall due to pride is detailed in the book of Isaiah, chapter 14, verses 12 through 17. And it's kind of interesting to read, and gives actually how Lucifer rebelled against God and due to pride. And God didn't hesitate at all, man. He just tossed him out of heaven. And and how many angels followed Lucifer? Well, the Bible, to my knowledge, the Bible doesn't specifically say how many. An interpretation of Revelation, the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verses 3 and 4, suggests that a third of the angels may have fallen during Lucifer's rebellion. I don't think that's an ironclad interpretation, but it could be, and maybe a third of them did. There were another rebellion was when the 200 watchers decided to they really liked the looks of the ladies and wanted to have some participation in what the humans were doing, and so that's mentioned briefly in Genesis. It might be chapter 6. The watchers, if you read the book of Enoch, which is quoted a few times in the New Testament, I'm told or I've heard, but it's not considered part of the Bible. Book of Enoch really goes in a lot more detail, the rebellion of the Watchers, and that's a interesting, very interesting story. That's what ended up creating the giants, the Nephilim, and people love to based on my going through the YouTube, people love to try to figure out who the giants were, the Nephilim, how did they survive Noah's flood, and it's a lot of fun trying to figure this stuff out. Was Goliath that David slew. He was a giant, we think around 9 feet tall, maybe taller, and he was one of the Nephilim. Anyway, it's you can get into all that. That was a big rebellion, and then the one act, really, the first act of rebellion by humans was Adam and Eve eating the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That was an act of rebellion, which took us from a perfect world, Garden of Eden world, and kind of sent things into a spiral. Polluted our earth with sin. Okay, all right. Don't get into all that. It appears that some believers in the gap theory see an older, perhaps ancient universe before God starts the 6 days of creation. Okay. Um, and I don't want to criticize this, but I would ask this question. Doesn't really matter if God started over around 6,000 years ago. All right. The rest of the Bible talks about those 6,000 years. Okay. Doesn't really matter if God started over, and didn't see that was important to really tell us anything about an earlier universe, if there was one. And so, personally, I don't believe in the gap theory at all. To me, it's much simpler not to. But to me, the logical question doesn't really matter. Are we going to lose sleep on it? I don't. Okay. Now let's move on. Now we can get an estimate of the beginning of creation by reviewing the excuse me, genealogical information in several places of the Bible. Many ages are recorded in the Old Testament, and Matthew 1 and Luke 3 record the family line of Jesus going back as far as Adam. And so, if you take the ages of these people and the genealogical record, there are 42 generations from Adam to Jesus, and look at all those ages. And I know another crazy thing about the Bible: people lived hundreds of years. The oldest was recorded as Methuselah, who was the grandfather, or was he the great grandfather? I think he was the grandfather of Noah, and he lived 969 years. And skeptics say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Why would you believe any of that stuff? No one lives that long." Um, there's actually, I think, a pretty good case you can make through genealogy and DNA and so forth that it's very plausible that people did live hundreds of years in the early days of creation. All right, and we'll do a video on it someday. It really does can make a lot of sense. All right, it's not proof. We haven't uncovered a skeleton that we can somehow prove lived to be hundreds and hundreds of years. Okay, to my knowledge, no one's ever uncovered a human skeleton like that. And but it It does. It's a theory, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about genetics. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm at now. So 6,000 years, we get that by looking at the timeline that the Bible talks about, and some of that timeline is can be paired with historical events, like the Temple of Solomon, I think, can be dated, and the Bible says, 460 or 480 years before that was the Exodus, and anyway, we can't get an exact date based on this. Um, there was a one of the early church scholars. I'm going to botch the name, Dionysius Eusebius or something like that, which I think translates to Denny the Fat. Okay, who was asked to figure out when did creation start by it may have been Pope Gregory the Great back in the 500s or 600s. I'm kind of reaching back into memory here. Um, and he figured out that, oh, okay, it started on this day in the year 4004 BC at such and such a time. I don't think we can get that precise. Okay, so it was an estimate. So we don't really know, even if the world is roughly 6,000 years old. We can't nail it down, at least not yet. Okay, so that's kind of what I had to say. But there are people I think that favor the gap theory may favor. Well, this universe is a lot older than we think, but we don't know how old it was. But God started over. All right. Maybe he did. I don't think so. I think it's a minority view in the Christian community, the gap theory. But there's a little bit of backup in the Bible for it, and I don't want to criticize it really too much from that standpoint. So, but does it really matter? Okay. So next begins the 6-day creation account of Genesis from a scientific perspective, and boy, it's something. And oh, you like my picture there? That's you probably realize the waves were not rolling in, so I'm not really sitting at the beach at sunset. That was from Clearwater Beach several years ago. I was down there, my original hometown. I was not born there, but I grew up there, and hope to go back. Maybe later this week, we might go down there for a couple of days. And anyway, it's a beautiful beach. One of the best beaches in America is Clearwater Beach, and it's also a pretty crowded town. Okay, so but in the beginning, the world was formless and dark and everything. Well, I figured it wouldn't make sense to have a black background, so we're coming up on light, and there's a preview of the first day of creation. All right, so well, that'll do it for this video, and time to roll the credits.